Welcome to Worth It. I'm your host, Lonnie Buse, on this interview and training network, Hypno 24/7 Live. And before I introduce my amazing guest today, I just want to welcome you, encourage you to check out all the other shows on this network, such as Kaz Riley's Trancing in the Sheets, where they discuss sexual freedom and all topics related to that, or Greg Beckett's Time to Get Unstuck, where him and his guests ponder one word and have a meaningful conversation around that word, or Paul Ramsey's The Fat Hypnotist, where he chronicles his weight loss journey. So today we have Stevon Lewis. And did I pronounce that name? Your name
You
right,
did.
Stevon?
You did. You did get it right. Thank you.
All right. Stevon Lewis is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He earned Bachelor's of Arts degrees in psychology and Afro-ethnic studies from California State University in Fullerton. He also has a Master's of Science degree in counseling with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy from California State University in Long Beach. Stevon began his therapy career in 2007 as a therapist at a community mental health agency in Long Beach, working with the families of adolescents involved with the juvenile justice system. More recently, he served as the Director of Counseling Services at Woodbury University, a small private university in Burbank, California. And currently, he is in private practice full-time in Torrance, where he works with adults struggling with imposter
Imposter.
syndrome and couples experiencing difficulty in their relationships as a result of poor communication and unmet expectations. In addition, he has done a lot. He is an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University. Stevon, welcome to Worth It.
Thank you. Thank you, Lonnie.
I'm so happy you're here. And I'm just going to say briefly to our viewers how we met.
Right. There you go. Like,
So we met through Instagram. This is when
we
social
did.
media is a good thing.
It can be an awesome thing.
Yeah, it can be. And then I would just remember you liking one of my photos and it was related to imposter syndrome. So I was like, who's this
Mhm.
guy? Who's this
Yeah.
guy? Let's go check. And I
That's
was
all into
like, yeah.
imposter syndrome, right?
And then I started do a little research, and then I was like, perfect. And I'm so glad we're having this talk now.
Yeah, fun times, fun times. Like this guy is like really into this stuff. He may actually know something. To be
Yeah.
determined.
No, I'm confident because we did have a brief talk before this. So, yeah.
Right.
So Stevon, tell me how you got into like having this be your specialty in your practice.
Sure. So I've been doing therapy for a while. I kind of stumbled into imposter syndrome. The way it worked is that I had several clients. And so what you're kind of taught is when you're in private practice is you need to try to market to the ideal client, that one person that you love working with, that you feel like you get the most out of therapy with. And, they kind of bring out the best in you and you bring out the best in them. And so as I started doing that evaluation for myself, I found some clients that kind of had similar histories and similar experiences and kind of suffering from the same symptoms, right? And as I dug into it more and did some more research, I realized it had a name, and it was called imposter syndrome. And I was like, I really love these guys. Uh, I want to work with them more. I need to find more of these guys.
That's awesome. So tell me, since you kind of noticed there's a kind of that you're noticing certain things with these clients that you're seeing. So what were some of the signs that you kind of noticed that were being present in clients you were working with? Like what struggles were they having?
Sure. So the thing I noticed was that these were individuals that I think you and I would consider are really high achievers.
Mm-hmm.
That in life we look at them and we say, man, that person's really accomplished a whole lot. They're doing really well in life for themselves. But for themselves, the individual doesn't ever feel like that. They feel like they're a fraud. They aren't able to really identify with their success. They think they're attributed to luck or all these other reasons besides their own kind of worth, right? And so hearing that story, and I'm like, this doesn't really add up for me because you guys are doing so well in life, but you don't feel like it. You feel like you're one step away from screwing everything up or being found out. And it's like, for me, that doesn't add up. I'm like a real rational, logical person, right? And that's the way I do therapy. Is like, if it doesn't really make sense, then I've got a question. Like, well, what the hell's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of doing that stuff, you start to find out like a little bit of their history, and there are tons of similarities there. So, right, that they had a household where they had a parent that was super critical of them.
Mm.
So, this might look like a parent who continually kind of focuses on the way their improvement needs to happen. and not really celebrating the successes, right? So it's not equal for them. So it's, stand up straight. You got a B, why didn't you get an A? So it's just little things, right? Not that the parent's intending to be harmful to me, but that sends a message to the individual as they're growing up that something's just not right, like I'm not enough. The other thing I found was that it's individuals had in their history was a kind of situation where they're the only ones in their family to kind of attain the success that they've had, right? So that, maybe their parents didn't have college degrees, or that, they had family who were on drugs or in jail or what have you. And but for whatever reason, they were really successful. Like they were high achievers, school came easy, they got good grades, in career, they just kind of excel. And so they don't kind of identify with that because they're like, well, nobody in my family is sort of like me. Then how is it that I'm here, that I've got all this bad negative stuff? I don't really know what I'm doing. And the last thing that I noticed was that these are people who are kind of in spaces where they might be the only person that looks like them in that space. So think about like women in tech, men in nursing, or people of color, kind of in majority white spaces. And so they're looking around, there's like nobody else in the room like me. I know I'm probably in the wrong room then. And so a lot of my work is trying to really get them or convince them that no, you belong where you are, you're not a fraud, and let's own that we have something that maybe everybody else doesn't.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a mix of childhood and
Mhm.
also contextual, like what
Yes.
situation they're in. So knowing that's, and it's kind of like a wide spectrum of things,
Mhm.
knowing that, how is it detrimental? Like, how is it kind of showing itself in the actions they're doing, or the relationships they're having, or things of that nature?
So these people walk around with a ton of self-doubt, right? And that starts to look like anxiety or depression because they're anxious that they're going to be found out to not really be deserving or, belonging in the area that they've kind of excelled in, or uh, in the room that they're now a part of, right? So they live in this fear, this constant fear that I'm going to be found out to be a fraud, that I don't know what I'm doing. And so that makes them really anxious,
Yeah.
right? And so there's this kind of anxiety around doing things well. And so I'm trying super hard to not be a failure. And as a result of trying super hard, you continue to do things well. But then there's more fear now that I'm going to be found out because I keep ascending higher and higher heights. And so I get more and more worried. The other thing is that the sadness is that because people will notice that they're really good, like you and I, will say, hey, you're awesome. Life is good. You're killing it. It puts pressure on them because they're like, well, I don't think so. And so then now something must be wrong with me for the fact that I don't also identify with what you see. And so they start to feel bad about that. They're like, I'm not grateful for what I have. Like people tell me I have this great job and, I'm not attached to it because, I don't feel like I belong or I deserve it. And I feel guilty about that. And so it shows up a lot like anxiety or depression.
Wow. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword. Like no matter
Mhm.
what happens, they're kind of just feeling worse about it or
Yep.
themselves. Hmm.
Yep. 100%.
So, I mean, obviously some people are like, oh, everyone has insecurities. So, but what are you noticing that like the differences between someone who just has insecurities
Mhm.
as opposed to somebody that has this kind of phenomenon? Like what's the kind of
For sure. So
yeah.
I think like the average person, most of us are kind of fall in that category.
Yeah.
When we try new things, we get a little bit nervous about it. Like, right, there's a normal level of nervousness that we might feel about that, or a little bit of doubt. Like, I don't know if I got this. I've not ever really done this. So, I don't, hopefully it turns out well. I think I've prepared, but I'm not quite sure. Right. The thing that's different is that once we accomplish that task, we often feel like, well, I got this. Right. So, like, take me as a therapist, before I sit in a room with someone, I may have felt like, well, I don't know that I know how to do therapy. This is my first time kind of getting out here, and hopefully I help them. But, I got this training in school, but I haven't helped a ton of people. But after a while, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm pretty certain that I know what I'm doing to try to help people. I may not be expert on each individual's kind of history and what's bringing them into therapy, but I do have confidence in my own abilities. People with imposter syndrome never are able to kind of connect with that and get past that belief or doubt about their abilities, even though they've experienced some success.
Interesting. So what do you think it is that makes it so hard for certain people to internalize their successes like that?
Mhm. So I think for me, what I found is that it's their core belief about themselves.
Mm.
Like we all kind of have a narrative about who we are, right? And I think for people that struggle with imposter syndrome, their narrative is one that they aren't capable or they don't have what it takes. And
Mm.
so then that is the driving force behind their belief system. And like if I believe that about myself, that I don't really have what it takes, even if I accomplish something, I've got to attribute it to something external outside of me, right? Like because it's not coming from in me, because I know that I don't have what it takes because my parent used to always tell me that I wasn't doing things right. They always commented and told me about the things I was doing wrong. So
Yeah.
I'm a screw up, right? And so then when something good happens, it can't be because of me. It must have been luck, or
Mm,
it must have been because this person really likes me and they're nice. And so they tell everybody that they're doing a good job. Or, oh, everybody got really good grades in this class. It was
yeah.
easy. It's none of the stuff that, like, I studied hard and I earned it and I deserved
Right, right. And yeah, beliefs, right? Beliefs
it.
become people's realities oftentimes, right? It's
Yep,
just
yep,
like,
yep.
so, and that whole concept of luck, I find interesting. It's like luck, like, oh, it's some externalized random act
Hmm.
of I don't know what. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah, right.
so so how do you? I'm just curious. How do you start reframing that concept of luck with your own clients? Like, what do
Hmm.
you kind of say around that? Like, people are like, yeah, I'm just lucky, or that was like a lucky shot, or
Right.
what?
I am 100% relentless in my challenging of people's thoughts. So I give disclaimers when I do therapy.
Love
I
it.
tell people that I'm going to police their words, their language, because I believe that how we talk about ourselves has an impact. And so
Mm,
I'll tell people that I know you're going to get upset with me, but I'm going to stop you when I hear stuff that I think is toxic to your kind of perception of self. And then I also give it that I'm going to relentlessly challenge you on your thoughts. Like I like the scientific method. If you make a statement, then I'm going to need you to provide evidence to support that stuff. So
mm,
when they talk about luck and they talk about these things that they've accomplished, I'm saying, well, if it's luck, then you're saying I could have done the same thing and gotten the same results.
mm,
And oftentimes it's in some, field that I have no knowledge or education in. It's like, you're a rocket scientist. And like, oh, you were lucky to do that. So then I could have gone in and I could have gotten the job too. They're like, well, no, you didn't. It's like, well, then it wasn't luck. Because what luck says is that anyone without any training or anything special about them could have been in the right place at the right time and they would have gotten the exact same result. And when I put it to them like that, and they're like, well, no, it's partly this. And it's like, well, then let's start owning that you have something.
mm. Nice. I like that.
Mhm.
I like that. And yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's really comes down to people recognizing their accomplishments that they do
Mhm.
succeed in certain areas, like you're mentioning, like not everyone can be a rocket scientist.
Right,
so
right.
so and there's this author, her name is Judy Holler, I believe, and she wrote this book, Fear is My Homeboy. And
I like it.
she basically says imposter syndrome is leveling up. So it's
Hmm.
leveling up. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that kind of like, it's basically like she's saying it's leveling up in your career, so you're
Hmm.
having certain fears around that because you actually are expanding,
Right,
expanding
right.
up. So
And
what are
there,
your
there's
thoughts
there's
on that?
this like kind of
Yeah.
unspoken pressure that comes with being successful.
Mm,
Because now what the world says is that you can do this and you must do this all the time. Or at
mm,
least we tell ourselves that, right? That
yeah.
like as an example, I use tons of analogies when I do therapy. So that if
Go
I'm
for
a,
it.
a basketball player and I score 20 points, am I a 20-point scorer or is that something that I did as a fluke?
Mm,
Right. And so it's like oftentimes I think the pressure becomes that like, well, if I scored 20 points, even if I've been averaging only 10, now I've got to average 20 because
mm,
I did it once. Right. And so we put that pressure on ourselves, or we feel like society puts that pressure on ourselves. So like when we become successful, we kind of start to shy away from that or become fearful of that because it adds this level of responsibility. And so
mm,
what I do is like with people that have imposter syndrome, because they are high achievers, it's like, well, you've been scoring 20. And so maybe stop seeing yourself as a 10-point scorer because you're a 20-point scorer. And
mm,
just because you're a 20-point scorer doesn't mean that you're going to always score 20. Sometimes you might score 40. Sometimes you might have a game where you score 10 or 15. But on average, you're doing really well. And so for them, they're like, but if I don't score 20, then that means something. And I'm saying, what does that really mean? I'm questioning that. You're defining that a certain way. You're telling yourself that somehow now uh, has some bearing on your character or your abilities. And I'm
mm,
saying, unless you mean to tell me that LeBron James is no longer a good player because he only scored 7 points in the game.
mm.
I don't know if I buy that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically oftentimes people who are just constantly thinking that they have to reach these high expectations for
Hmm.
themselves, right? And
Hmm.
like they're worried that they'll get knocked off that pedestal in some way,
Right,
shape, or
right.
form. Right. Huh.
That they've always got to maintain this high level of functioning. That
Yeah.
they have to now, it's almost a sense of perfection.
Yeah.
right? That there's no opportunity for me to not be this thing that people see me as. And
Mm,
I'm like, well, last time I checked, we're all human. Nobody's perfect. Why couldn't you have a 7 point game and still also deserve to be in the Hall of Fame?
mhm, mm,
Unless you're telling me that no Hall of Famer has ever scored 7 points, or that no one to ever do anything great got like a B or a C or a D or a fail.
mm.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So yeah, there's like so many factors involved. We have
Hmm.
like comparison, expectations, our beliefs, are like.
Yeah.
So when you're working with clients, is it sort of just like, okay, let's just focus on one, like, because it seems like this they created a tower for themselves of
Hmm.
all these
Hmm.
elements, right?
Right.
So
And
it's like, so how do you even start approaching something like this?
so I come in as kind of like a demolition person, right? Like, so I start to, one, make people aware of their thinking about stuff. Like, that's hugely important for me. Like, if you aren't aware that, like, you have these beliefs and they aren't really based in logic or based in reality, that they're in essence irrational, that's the first part. You got to be aware that the way you think about the world and the way you see yourself isn't actually reality. It's not correct, right? And so I've got to do a lot of work up front to kind of get them to accept that piece. And then once I do that, then we're working on tearing down some of these core beliefs. And sometimes we take it one by one, depending on how high that tower goes, like you said. Or
Yeah.
sometimes we focus in on ones that are kind of the foundational, right? Those core beliefs that are really negative, right? And let's just attack those, and then the whole rest of it will come crumbling down.
And it's oftentimes seeming like behaviors, people are like kind of taking behaviors to an identity level, right? So
Hmm.
it's sort of like, if I'm doing this or if I'm acting this way in this environment, it must mean this about myself. Like we take on
Hmm.
the I am kind of thing.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
where I think really it gets tripped up for a lot of people. It's like this identity level of like, it's not just like actions or behaviors anymore in their environment. It's like,
right.
this means this about me, right?
Right, right. And that now, if I'm not that, what does that really say
Mm,
about who I am?
yeah.
Or if I don't believe that what people, say about me, then I'm not deserving of it. Then I'm a fraud and I'm fake,
Mm,
and I'm living a lie.
yeah.
And it's getting them to, challenge that way of thinking.
Yeah.
Unless you're telling me that all of society, the rest of the world, has somehow you've done a really good job of duping me, right? Like you've tricked everyone into believing that you have something that you don't.
Mm,
And at a bare minimum, I say, well, then at least give your credit for being able to do that one, right?
right.
That like at least give yourself credit for being able to, like, you've done such a good job tricking people to get to this level. Why wouldn't you just continue being able to trick people then?
That's funny. It's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
It's
why would
like
it stop? Right.
exactly, exactly. Like at least give us like maybe you don't know what you're doing, but nobody's gonna find out because you're so good at faking it. Then, but at least give us credit for that.
Oh, it's funny.
Yeah.
Like that. That's kind of funny though, but it's true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly that means they're just a really good fraud. So
Right.
like
Exactly. Like
they're
like
like expert at it, expert level.
at least own that part of it, right? That you're really good at being a fraud. Better than the average person.
That is funny. So there seems like there's a lot of, obviously there's anxieties and stuff. So there seems to be like a lot of overwhelming fears based on this fraud. So what are
Hmm.
kind of the fears that you're noticing people really like immersed in?
So for me, I find that people are fearful that they don't deserve kind of the success they have, right?
Mhm.
For whatever reason, they've determined that somebody else around them is actually more qualified or better to have the job or the position. The other fear is that they're going to be found out that they aren't really capable. Um, One of the reasons that one exists is because people often will say that, well, I have this vision in my head about how hard something should be for us to attain it. And
Mhm.
if I didn't have to work that hard to get it, then I must have done something wrong,
Mhm.
right? And so I faked my way into it.
Right, right.
And so part of it is challenging that there's this belief or expectation that they have about, well, for me to get to this level, like you've got to work really hard. And I didn't have to work that hard to get here.
Mhm.
And so then, there comes the fraud. I didn't do it the way it was supposed to be done, right? So now, I kind of snuck in, and it's me kind of getting them to normalize, like, say, you're comparing yourself to somebody else's struggle, but why can't we just say that, like, because that was easy for you, doesn't mean that you don't deserve it? That, again, the analogies, right? And I use
Right.
sports. So, like, Usain Bolt's really fast, right? He's like the fastest man ever to run on Earth. I'm not. Stephen Lewis is not the fastest person to run on earth. So what you're telling me is that because Usain Bolt beat me and he didn't have to run as hard, he doesn't deserve to win,
Mm,
right? And I'm like, well, no, he does. He has all these things that I don't, and that's what makes it easier for him to cover distance at a faster rate than me. And that's okay, because I also don't think that Usain Bolt is the therapist that Stephen Lewis is.
right.
That's okay. It's all good. We're just different. And
Yeah.
some people have to struggle at other things. I can't run as fast as him, but I also don't think he's as good as therapy at me.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
I don't want to run at all.
Right, right, right.
I want to avoid it. I want to
Yeah,
avoid
I don't
running.
want to run. I don't want to run. And that's okay. You don't have to run.
So it also seems with us talking about this, it's also more about how we define what work is to us,
Right.
or like learning, like how
Hmm.
one learns. So
Right.
there's that kind of layer of things as well, like how we
Yeah.
define what we do.
Yeah. So like really deconstructing how people think about themselves, the world, and the future.
Yeah.
Right. So like really kind of breaking that stuff down and saying, as we assess each one of those areas, are there some pitfalls or are there some flaws in your way you're thinking? And
Mhm.
oftentimes you'll find like as I allow you to speak and then I hear kind of based on how you're talking about yourself, how you see the world, that lets me know what you think. I'm saying, well, I don't know that that's accurate.
Mm,
And like I said, I'm based in the scientific method. If that's true, then give me examples that support that.
yeah.
And if you can't find examples, then I think we've got to, change that kind of hypothesis.
Yeah. And what you're saying, and which resonates with me, it's sort of like how we view this with our relationship with ourselves, but also
Hmm.
as a culture and a society as a whole, like how we're viewing others in it,
Yep,
and our whole background or how we see the world. So it's kind of like this.
for sure. It's like
Yeah.
it's like what the messages we got from the world about ourselves and about our abilities. Are we still interpreting those correctly? Right?
Mm,
That like maybe you made some growth over time.
yeah.
Maybe because you were, fearful that you didn't know what you were doing, you studied really hard and now you've got more information, right? Or maybe you pay attention to detail because you don't want to make a mistake, right? But those things are now behaviors that you have that are going to make you successful.
Mm, yeah.
So let's not separate you from what you're doing now to kind of get that success. And so I kind of also talk about the concept of like the inner bully, which is kind of that, inner critic or whatever. I think how some people kind of say it. I say inner bully because bullying people understand it.
Yeah.
And really kind of getting people to realize and recognize how we talk to ourselves or how we think about ourselves is often more negative than you would allow another person to do or be.
Right. Right.
Right. And so kind of really getting them to understand that like you're saying that everything you have is based on luck. If somebody else told you that, you'd be upset about that. Or if somebody else told you like you're terrible, you don't deserve this, you probably wouldn't accept it, especially if it's somebody who didn't know you,
Hmm.
right? And so I'm saying because it comes from inside of us, we're accepting that. And I'm saying, well, no, the inner bully's a liar, just like most bullies are. They just want to hurt you. And
Hmm.
your inner bully wants to hurt you, and it uses your insecurities and your fears and areas where you don't feel as confident to kind of beat you up. And I'm saying you got to challenge that stuff because it's lying to you constantly, and you're just taking it on like, well, it must be true because I feel this way. And I'm
Hmm.
saying just because you feel this way doesn't mean that it's absolutely true. It's because you think something that's not rational, and that's causing you to feel something that's inappropriate based in, it then causes you to kind of behave in a way that, doesn't really jive with what the world is giving you back.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So talking about the inner bully,
Mhm.
how have you helped people kind of reshape that, or reorient that in their own
Mhm.
minds, like over time,
For
like
sure.
if they're
Yeah.
coming in like, hey, I have an inner bully, like, so how do they end up seeing that
Yeah.
part of themselves later on, in those
So kind of othering it makes it good, right? So like I kind of work in session to when they say something that's negative, I was like, oh, there's that inner bully. I make them aware that, oh, your inner bully's saying that. Or it's like when they start to be kind of negative about themselves, like I'm just a screw up and
Mhm.
you know, I'm messed up at work and I'm not really good at this job. It's like, oh, there's that inner bully. It's telling you you don't know what you're doing. Right? Like how do we know that that's true? Because you got hired and you've been at this job for a while. And if that mistake was so bad, why haven't they fired you yet? Right?
Mm,
Well, it's coming. We'll win. And it's like I start to kind of be relentless about that stuff, right? Kind of really just poking holes in their story and what the inner bully saying. And so
mm,
I kind of try to get them to attribute that negative speech that they hear and the way that they're starting to see and feel bad about themselves to something that the inner bully's doing to them. And I'm saying, well, what you got to do is stop accepting what it's telling you, right? And so in our work, I, I use thought records. I use, all sorts of interventions to kind of make us aware of that thinking, but then coming up with more rational kind of counter statements about our thoughts.
Cool. We're going to go to that soon.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so like that, you sort of make the inner bully like the other, like the
Hmm.
separate part of you
Yep.
that's not the you that you
Yep.
are. That's
Uh-huh.
kind of just like, I like that.
Yeah,
Um,
so you that wants to make you feel terrible.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, a little jerk.
Yeah, yeah. I hate interbullies. I hate interbullies. I hate them. I hate them. I want to beat them up.
How have you addressed your inner bully? Do you even have one anymore? Or are you just
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think
like,
everybody has. I say everyone has an inner bully. Some people are just better at kind of beating their inner bully up, right?
mm,
If you didn't know you had one, you might not be as good at beating it up. But if you recognize you have one, you might be a little bit better. So yeah, definitely. I mean, my inner bully could tell me all sorts of stuff that like is not true. It could say, "Well, Steven, you're not really a good therapist, right? Like you think you're good, but you're not
mm,
that good. Because if you're really that good, then you'd be in Beverly Hills, or you'd be on TV, and you'd be a star, and you'd have your own show like Dr. Phil or something or whatnot, right? And it's like, well, yeah, and it's like, well, maybe that's true. That's one way to define it. But also, I do think I'm a good therapist because I have clients that come back, right? Or that I know people that I have helped, right? And they've ended therapy and they're doing all right, beating their own inner bullies up, right? So I've had some success. And that if I were truly terrible, then I wouldn't have been in business for this long. That people would have one session and they probably wouldn't come back. And so that's the logic that I use to kind of say, well, the evidence suggests that if I were truly terrible and horrible, like you say, then I'd be getting different results.
yeah. So you seem to be really good with rationalizing that, right? Just
Yes.
keeping it in the brain.
Mhm.
So what happens like for your clients who kind of are trying to rationalize it, but then now they're already in that felt that
Yeah.
kinesthetic felt like, oh, now I'm just
Right.
feeling horrible. So like
Right.
I
Right.
try to rationalize it, but now it's slipped. so
Right.
so how
So
do you work with that? Yeah.
we start with that feeling, and I get them to kind of verbalize what the feeling is, and then get them to become aware of the thinking, aware of the thought that's associated with that. And so as they talk about the thought, and I was like, okay, so where's the evidence to support that now?
Mm,
So now that we're clear that you feel, you know, terrible, you feel like you're an idiot, and that's because you think you made a mistake when you were giving your presentation and you've embarrassed your entire department.
mhm,
Where's the evidence to support that that's what really happened?
mm,
Did your boss call you in and say you're such a screw up and you're a terrible, horrible person, or that they're going to fire you? Did people like run out of the room? What's
right.
the evidence to support? Well, nobody did that. What did people say after you did the presentation? They said it was a good presentation. Okay, so they're lying, is what you're telling me. Yeah. Well, so you work with a bunch of liars. No, no, I don't think they're liars. So they're not liars. So they're telling you the truth. So that when they told you that because that's what they believe.
Mm.
Well, yeah, but they're saying that because it's not. So then, yeah, that's what they do. They go around and tell people stuff that's not true then, right? And I'm just kind of back and forth, like, I will not let you escape it, right? Like you can try to talk your way
Yeah.
around it, but no.
All right, now I'm gonna challenge you. Maybe
Okay,
not.
go for it. I like it. I
So
like it. I love
I
it.
don't know if I am or not. So say there is someone who has imposter syndrome and they have failed. Like
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah,
they're just like, oh God, this did go horrible. Like,
yeah,
this
yeah,
did
yeah.
not
That's a
go the way I
possibility.
wanted to go. So
Right.
how do you work with work them with that? Like work them out of that situation
Right.
when they might have a rational basis of why they feel the way they feel.
There's evidence. They're like, I did
Yeah.
get fired.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Come on,
yeah,
yeah, I got
yeah,
fired.
yeah.
What
I,
are you
I
talking
got,
about?
I got, I got canned, and yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
do
I
feel
got
terrible.
evidence. I
You
have
want your evidence? Here's the pink slip they gave you. They told me to get
right.
out. Like, here's my last check,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, no, what I do is start to normalize that stuff then,
Mm,
right? So then I start to say, well, what does that really mean then? That you'll never get another job again? Does this really mean that you're not qualified? I start to kind of normalize, what does it mean to not be perfect? That if
mm,
we're not perfect, then what? Because you're saying that you got fired, and I know that really does suck, and I'm not going to minimize that. Nobody wants to get fired. You did. What does that really mean about you now? Does
mm,
that mean that like you're not hireable, that you don't know how to do a good job, that you can't learn from this? Like, help me understand how this is going to impact you in the long term, in the future, forever,
mm. Yeah, because
right? And
people
like,
just don't see it as just a mistake, or not a mistake, just like something that happened, but out of their
right, right,
control, like out of
right,
their
because what they
control.
do is they identify it with there's something wrong with me,
Yeah.
And so this is confirmation, that there's something wrong with me. I knew that going in through life because parents have told me such, or nobody in my family is doing what I'm doing, or nobody else in the room looks like me. So I know I don't belong. Here's the confirmation I got fired. And it's like, well, is that the case? Is that what that firing really means? Or was this place just not the place, the proper fit for
Right. So sort of seeing it like that silver lining, like what
you?
is it actually doing for you instead? You just might
Yeah,
have left a job that wasn't suited for you. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Or
Um,
that you probably be hired again somewhere else.
yeah.
Like what does that mean? Like maybe you did screw up that badly and you had to be let go.
Yeah.
But what does that also mean for you in the future? Does that really mean you're a screw up? Because what I like to do is kind of in normalizing it is saying like, is that a thing that because something happens to you once, that is now who you are? And
Mm,
so like the analogy I use, like if I'm driving and I get in an accident, am I now a bad driver? Say I
mm,
did a bad thing, like right, I got in an accident and I sent the other driver to the hospital. Does that mean I should never be allowed to drive again?
mm,
And oftentimes they're like, well, no. It's like, yeah, because I didn't mean to. Like I did make a mistake. I did something very bad, right? But also I don't know that I should not be allowed to drive again. And then the way you're treating yourself is saying that because you weren't perfect, now you should have all the negative kind of, consequences as a result of that. And to me,
yeah.
that doesn't sound fair.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of that negativity bias that we have in our brains, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we could have like glowing reviews. We have all these, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
have that one person that says something,
Right,
and that's what
right.
we're holding on to.
Yeah.
And that's basically what kind of this like phenomenon is. It's like we're grasping onto that one.
Yep.
We're like,
And we're
oh,
seeking
yeah,
seeking evidence to try to support that confirmation bias, right? Is to try to find ways to support this negative perception I have about myself. So I know it's true, and so I've got to ignore any of the positive stuff, anything that refutes it, ignore that stuff, but only take in the stuff that favors it and supports
wow. Yeah, it's like everyone's like working hard to like really feel bad about themselves.
it. Yeah, yeah, those inner bullies are active. They are active. They are relentless. They do not give up.
So now what I want to ask about like sort of like race and culture because I was
Mhm.
reading up on stuff.
Okay, hey, I like reading. Yeah.
And there was like there was a University of Texas study I think back in 2017 that was published in a Journal of Counseling Psychology.
Hmm.
And it said that Black students, which makes sense to me, who suffered from imposterism
Hmm.
also had higher levels of anxiety and depression related to discrimination they perceived.
Hmm.
So are you noticing with your client work, and I don't know what your demographic is like at all, but are you noticing a heavier kind of like particular racial components to imposterism or to this imposter phenomenon at all?
For sure. So like that
Yeah,
would be kind of that third kind of component, like when I
yeah,
talked about people of color in
yeah.
spaces that, are kind of majority white or don't look like them.
Mhm.
So yeah, I do see a lot of that. It's because I'm the, only Latina in this space, or I'm the only black male in here. So it's like I don't know exactly what I'm doing, or if I'm held to a different standard. So I'm always kind of worried or hyper vigilant about that stuff, right? And so I do see some of that coming to the therapy room with me.
Yeah.
People bring that because they are having experiences and they're saying like, well, yeah, I don't know that they want me here or that I belong in this space. And it's like, well, you got hired for it. Let's go with that,
Yeah.
right? But they don't feel like they do belong because sometimes treatment can be a little bit different.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, it's a tough one. We're being honest about being in America, being a black male or a person of color in America. There are different set of standards. I
yeah.
didn't create the standards, I didn't make the rules, but they exist. And for us to deny that they do, we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, and that's basically part of the reason why I want to talk, race with regard to
Hmm.
this topic. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Right, right.
like, I want an honest, and especially I noticed that like upon reading, a lot of university students were
Hmm.
facing this really harshly with this imposter phenomenon who were like minorities because, yeah,
Right.
they're the university as a whole are like white kids and like
Hmm.
they're trying to compete with them. And then they're trying to, like you mentioned, they might be the only one in their family that's now like
In
trying to,
college,
yeah. So
yeah,
it's like so many other more factors that are on top of
and
this.
it's a ton
Yeah,
of ton of pressure,
yeah,
right? There's that pressure of, well, you're here now, you should know what you're doing.
yeah.
And it's like, well, who's the model that I have? Who do I have to ask? Where's my community to
Mm,
support? If I'm Caucasian, and both my parents went to college and have higher advanced degrees or education, then I've got somebody I can ask, like, hey, this is stuff, they can normalize that for me,
Mm.
right? Like, but if I go back home and my parents haven't been to college, how do I tell them how tough college is? They're like, oh, well, you did well in high school, you'll be fine, even when I don't feel like that. And then if there aren't a ton of other people that look like me at the university or in my major, if I'm an engineer or something like that, then how do I, where's my support network to kind of help me beat up my inner Billy and refute those negative, messages that come out and say like, yeah, you don't belong.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
like when where's the support to kind of reinforce that when I do fail that engineering test, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be an engineer.
Mm. That's big.
Right?
Yeah, like how do you,
Yeah.
and yeah, how do you even work with that? Like how do you work with somebody who sees that? Like, yeah,
Hmm.
I am the only one here. Maybe
Yeah.
even yourself. I mean, black male therapist. You know what I
The
mean? Like,
unicorn.
yeah.
Unicorn.
So
100% unicorn.
so how did you even, go about your life going, because you seem like you don't have this and you're working with others that
I'm
have
really
these
well
problems.
adjusted.
Yeah. Like, because I've admitted that
I'm
I've
the
had
well
those
adjusted
problems,
therapist,
you know,
right? Yeah.
I've admitted that I've had this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, so I'm just curious, like even for
I've
yourself.
just lived with it longer. That's all.
Yeah.
No, so I mean, you're right. I mean, being a black male therapist, I am often the only black male therapist in a room. I in my entire program, grad school, I was the only black male in the program. When I was at kind of Long Beach South Bay camp meetings, the only black male therapist in the room. Very few black therapists in general, but definitely the only black male. Became president of a chapter. When we go up to conferences, only kind of black male in the room, right? So it's like this thing of I'm in a space that's kind of more dominated, I think, at the level that I'm at, kind of definitely female heavy,
Mhm.
right? But definitely not a ton of black male therapists for sure. But I've had some pretty good mentors, really good mentors, you know uh, black females that have kind of assisted me and taken me under their wing. But yeah, it's a thing, because you're like, well, I'm in here, I'm in this space, and I'm doing therapy, and the way that I do therapy is going to be impacted by everything that you see here, right? That, my experience in the world as a therapist, we all bring that stuff into the room. And I moved through the United States of America as a pretty large black male. I'm about 6'2.5", 6'3". So, pretty good size. So I look like a football player, don't play football, right? But I moved through the world in that way, in that kind of influence and impacts me. And so for me, it's being in a room and it's like, well, how am I going to be perceived? Do I fit in with what therapy is supposed to look like? Because the way that I speak and talk and mannerisms might be different from what was taught in school. Like the way they teach you in school is to kind of sit and, you got to sit all straight. And that's not me. I slouch, sometimes they say don't smile. And I smile all the time. I'm a happy fucking dude, you know what I mean? So I smile. I don't know what to do. I curse sometimes, and that's just
Yeah.
Steve On.
Yeah.
But I just know how to be me. And so like oftentimes, you get told, well, say it like this. And it's like, I just got to say it like me. And so getting to become okay with like, hey, I don't have to fit this box, but because I don't fit the box doesn't mean that I'm wrong or
Mm.
I don't belong.
It
And
probably
so I
also
think
gives you more freedom too. Sorry
for
to
sure,
interrupt, right? Like you just like,
yeah,
oh, I
yeah,
can create my own, like I create my own environment,
absolutely. Yeah,
right?
my brand of therapy is probably very unique. Yeah, absolutely. Questionable at times, I guess.
We won't say that
Yeah,
because
who
you got.
knows what I'm saying, right? Like, oh God, yeah. But I'm just being honest.
I love it. I love it. So that's a good thing, So you're just like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're authentic
My
with yourself.
clients like it.
Yeah, I mean that's all
I'm
that
doing some good
matters,
work.
right?
They keep coming back, and some get done with therapy, and we're
Right.
rolling. I tell them I'm trying to put myself out of a job,
I
and
said
so
the
we
same
shift.
thing. I said the
Yeah,
same
right.
thing.
So like when we go from seeing each other weekly to every other week to once a month, I'm like, hey, we're doing it. You're doing all right.
It's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. So you mentioned a lot of solutions throughout here and how you kind of
Hmm.
address verbally. So how would you really like? So how do you kind of work with people to help them first embrace the concept of having fears? Like because we all have that. So
Right.
how do you allow people to embrace their fears and sort of build that resilience? I think that people need to
Hmm.
like to kind of adapt into their environment that they're in. So what?
For sure.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of, like I said, with the kind of awareness building and insight kind of oriented stuff. I use rational emotive behavior therapy.
Mhm,
So really connecting the thinking to the feeling to the behavior.
mhm,
And I'm relentless in that earlier part of just the awareness. Like I've got to build the awareness about how you think. And then I use some of that psychodynamic stuff to connect it to childhood and other
mhm,
messages. And so getting them to see like, here's what you're doing to yourself.
mhm,
And if someone else were doing this to themselves, what would you say? And so
mhm,
all I'm asking you to do is treat yourself how you might treat other people. Like,
mhm.
why is that so difficult or so hard for me to, ask them? Like, I don't think that's a big ask. You have the
Yeah,
ability to do it. I'm just saying do it to you.
yeah.
Right. And so then after I kind of build that awareness, it becomes about practice, repetition,
Mhm,
right? That like as those thoughts come in from that inner bully,
yeah.
how are you kind of changing that? Are you accepting it still? And then I'm calling them out on that stuff. Hey, it
Mhm,
sounds like you're allowing that inner bully, you're believing that stuff. And they're like, ah, you're right. Right. So it's like, okay, so what else could it be then? You're right, because it's not this. Where's the evidence? So
mhm.
they'll start coming into session, my clients, and they'll say, yep, but you're right. You know what? There was no evidence for it. And so I was like, it was tough, but I had to let it go. And I was like, exactly, exactly. And we just keep doing it, keep doing it.
Nice. So there's a lot of things there that kind of layered
Hmm.
in there for someone who's like kind of new to this, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm realizing they might have these
Hmm.
certain issues. So
Hmm.
one step would be to recognize, kind of have that self-awareness, sort of
Right.
be objective, right, and be like,
Hmm.
okay, there's an inner bully. Like I'm talking
Yes.
to myself a certain way, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then to kind of write out or like internalize or maybe even write out like,
Mhm.
um, would you say things to would you say things to support the fact that it's not true or that the
Yeah,
bully's
so
not true? Yeah.
evidence that contradicts this belief you have about yourself. And
Mhm.
so that's actually an intervention. Like I have people create an evidence sheet,
Okay.
which is really just a piece of paper where you just write down evidence that is not refutable. It's facts,
Mhm.
right? And so we just write it down, however, small or whatever we think it might be. Anything that counters what we've told ourselves, what the inner bully is telling us about ourselves that is negative and why we should be afraid and fearful and anxious and why we don't belong and aren't deserving. Write down stuff that's true, that
Mhm.
is fact, that's evidence to counteract that stuff. And so we just start to build a list. And over time, you can just look at the list and not have people save it in their phone. And you just look at it and it's like, yep, that's true. That was true. So this can't be, I can't believe the inner bully because this actually happened.
Mm, nice, nice. Anything else
Yeah.
you want to add about this whole topic or any further solutions that you would tell people about?
I think for me, it's just that people don't have to accept that they should go through life feeling like an imposter forever,
Mm,
or the fact that like they don't have to. I think sometimes we often feel like the talking negatively to ourselves or speaking negatively about ourselves is a way of being humble. And I'm
mm,
saying I don't know that like to be humble, then you have to deny that you've ever accomplished anything, right?
mm,
And so I think that's a little shift where people kind of get lost in that. It's like, oh well, I don't want to think of myself too big, and I don't want to get too high, so I
mm,
don't celebrate that stuff.
yeah,
But what you do is also spend an inordinate amount of time concentrating and focusing on the negative, where you didn't accomplish everything, right? Where you failed maybe, or you didn't do so well. And I'm saying just be fair. If you're going to spend a lot of time on the negative, spend the same amount on the positive that you did. But
nice.
if you're not going to do that on the positive, then don't spend that much on the negative. I'm just saying be fair to yourself. I'm not asking a whole lot of people.
Oh, I like that. And it's true because people are, who have this are so often dismissive
Right.
of all the good, and then
A
forget it,
100%.
and they're just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like,
Yeah. It's
ignoring it
like, oh,
all.
well, you got a new job. Oh, well, I'm still in the probation period. Okay. But why can't we focus on the fact that you did get a new job? That's
Yeah,
all I'm saying. That's a fact. You got a new job. Can we celebrate that?
yeah, nice, nice.
Yeah.
So, Stefan, where can people reach out to you, learn more about you and your work? And yeah,
Sure, sure, sure. So I have a website. It's www.stevonlewis.com. That's STEVONLEWIS.com. Instagram, I'm on Instagram at Stevon Lewis MFT, like Mary Frances Thomas. That's kind of all my social media handles, LinkedIn, Twitter. It's all Stevon Lewis at Stevon Lewis MFT. So yeah, I'm pretty active there. My website has all my information. You can read about imposter syndrome on there, see some of the blogs I've written. Yeah, and just contact me that way.
awesome. And you do sessions in person in Torrance and also
Sure.
online, right? Or,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I'm in
cool.
private practice in Torrance. My office is off
Yeah.
of Sky Park.
Mhm.
So I see clients there. I'm there full time. Um, and I also offer video sessions for people that aren't close. So in California, that I can see anybody anywhere. I have clients that are in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, and then locally, some people, you know how LA is, right? Like, so some people will be in Santa Monica and they don't want to come to
Yes, they don't
Torrance.
want to. Yeah, they
Right.
don't want to take
We
that
can do a
trek.
video session much like this. I use a
Yes,
platform, or we can do a phone session, and it's still the same quality of therapy.
that's awesome. Well, thank you for being on my show today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for
This is
having me.
fun. Yeah, thank you so much.
I enjoyed it.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Until next time, folks.
Thank you for watching this episode of Worth It. And if you're wondering where you can learn more about me, well, I'm a hypnotist, NLP practitioner, and energy healer based in Hollywood, California. You can book a session with me at the shop I work at by going to liberatehollywood.com. But if you're out of the state, I do work through Zoom. And you can find more about me on my website, LaniBuess.com. That's LANIBUESS.com. Feel free to email me at change@LaniBuess.com or find me on Facebook at Coach Lonnie B or Instagram at Lonnie_B_change. And check out my YouTube channel, Lonnie Buess, where you'll find a bunch of videos to watch. And if you want to join the Facebook group for this very show, go to facebook.com/groups/worthitshow. Thanks again for watching this episode. Feel free to email me to give me feedback on how you're loving it. And again, just remember, you're worth it. Until next time.